Hey guys, it's Celestia, and I've been wanting to talk to you guys about something for a while now, so I wanted to take a few minutes to just sit down and do that. This isn't gonna be a super scripted, well put together, polished, essay-like video, but more so just being real with you and sharing my thoughts about something that's been on my mind, and some things that I've been wanting to clarify because I think they've been misunderstood. And I'm not saying you guys are to blame for that misunderstanding either, it's actually almost exclusively on me because of the way that I've presented some of my views. I've been very publicly, outspokenly anti-AI for a long time now, both on this channel and in my personal life. I've spoken at length about why I hold the views that I do, why I'm so against generative AI in its current form, and why I believe that its impact is so harmful. I'm tired of rehashing those same arguments over and over and over again, so you can click the iCard above to find a playlist of my many opinions on all of it if you're interested. But that's not what I want to talk about today. What I do want to talk about is how many people have interpreted my anti-generative AI stance as an anti-AI and automation as a whole stance, because it's prompted some criticism that I'd like to discuss. The anti-AI part is quick and easy to address, so I'll do that first. I'm against generative AI, not AI as a whole. I do see where this misunderstanding came from, because I often drop the generative part when I talk about it. So to be very clear, when I say I'm anti-AI, I mean exclusively anti-generative AI. I completely recognize the value of other forms of artificial intelligence. The anti-automation part, though, is what I really want to talk about, because it takes a lot more explaining. In some of my videos, I've addressed the one thing that AI bros love to tell artists more than anything else. Artists just don't want to be replaced. That we're just worried about our jobs and it's only a matter of time before we will be, and we need to just grow up and get over it. That we're just going the way of factory workers in the Industrial Revolution and we need to stop resisting the inevitable. In those videos, I argued that that's really easy for them to say right now, when it's primarily artists facing the risk of being made redundant by AI, but that when it eventually begins to replace all human jobs, including their own, I sincerely doubt they'll be nearly as flippant. The statement that I made that I think probably prompted a lot of this was in my Ghibli-style AI video, when I said, AI is threatening more jobs and fields of work every day, and everyone is eventually going to be at risk of being replaced by it if it keeps going the way it is without regulation or resistance. They're going to need to start saying, humans just don't want to be replaced at this point, because that's the direction we're going in. And if they're genuinely arguing that we should all sincerely be fine with that and embrace our own redundancy in favor of convenience, I truly have nothing left to offer them but pity. Now, I still do believe that statement, or at least what I meant by it, but I also think the way I worded it was a little too broad and oversimplified, because I can see exactly why people interpreted that as me being against automation as a whole. It really does come off that way, and I'll admit that it probably comes off that way because I'm very torn and conflicted about labor automation as a whole, and the part of me that leans towards being critical of it definitely influenced my wording way too much. And some people rightfully responded to that with their own conflicting opinion, that labor automation isn't the problem, and that it's not a bad thing to automate jobs that humans shouldn't even have to do because they're so basic that it's effectively a waste of human time, skill, and effort to do them at all. They argued that tedious grunt work being automated frees humans up to do work that's worthy of their time, and that shouldn't be demonized, but that the problem is instead that art is one of those things that is worthy of their time, so that being automated is a problem. And I don't fundamentally disagree with that. I think we as a species have been able to make the advancements that we have because the Industrial Revolution freed us from the obligation to spend the majority of our time doing manual labor, and that the automation of that manual labor allowed us to instead spend the majority of our time researching, developing, innovating, and pushing humanity forwards. It did put a lot of people out of jobs temporarily, and the damage that that did is not something I'm trying to dismiss or diminish, but the innovation that it prompted created new fields of work altogether and new jobs in the process. By no means do I think that all labor automation is bad, and I do think that in moderation and with careful regulation, it benefits society by allowing individuals to spend their time on work that means something to them and can't be done without them. I think it's important that people are doing jobs that actually require a human being to do them and not wasting their time with jobs that don't, as a concept anyway. And I did completely fail to express that view when I made that statement, so it's not exactly a surprise that it was met with criticism for being anti-automation. So I do want to make it clear that I'm not. But I also think it's more nuanced than just being pro-automation or anti-automation. I think there needs to be a balance, and I think there are lines that shouldn't be crossed. There will come a point when we automate too much and it becomes more detrimental to society than it is helpful, and I think we're reaching it. But I'm so conflicted about it because it's not like we can draw a line in the sand and say, here, this is enough automation. We're done now, let's stop. There's no way to objectively determine which jobs it would be beneficial to automate and which jobs it would be detrimental to automate, because that's both a matter of opinion and largely just speculative. It's guesswork. Educated guesswork if we bothered to do our due diligence and research what consequences to expect from each one, but guesswork nonetheless. Also, it doesn't seem like we're doing that. And there are two main negative consequences from labor automation that make me so conflicted and uneasy about it. The first being irreversible and potentially catastrophic dependence on the technology that we use to automate those jobs. It's one thing when we use technology technology to automate unskilled labor. Lifting stuff, moving stuff, cleaning stuff, very basic assembly, things that any human can do without needing to be extensively taught how to. Honestly, even then, there are points to be argued against automating all unskilled labor because those jobs are often the only ones available to people who can't afford an education. But that's a whole other can of worms that will send me on a tangent about the need for universally free education if I open it. And I don't want to get too off topic, so I won't. Point is, we're not really becoming dependent on technology if we automate those things. Us no longer doing them isn't going to result in such a deterioration of our own capabilities that we're unable to do our jobs ourselves. If our dishwashers break, it's an inconvenience, but it requires so little skill or understanding to wash dishes manually that we would still be able to do so even if dishwashing had been automated for so long that we had never done it before. But we're moving past automating unskilled labor and very quickly towards automating all labor. And that's where I start getting scared shitless of where that will take us in terms of the deterioration of our skills and subsequent independence as a society. I mentioned in one video that I was terrified of the fact that people are trying to develop AI surgeons that can complete surgery without the need for the participation of human surgeons. And someone commented that that was actually a good thing, because a machine is far more precise, unlikely to make the same potentially lethal mistakes as a human, and is effectively so superior to human surgeons that we won't really even need them anymore. And that's something we should welcome rather than resist. And I don't completely disagree with that. A machine probably would be so precise that the risk of accidental nicking of arteries during surgery, for example, could be almost entirely eliminated. We're not there yet, given the 6 million headlines about AI catastrophically fucking up almost every conceivable task that it's given. But in theory, I understand the value of that. But what if we embrace those automatic surgeons to the point that, as that commenter said, human surgeons become unnecessary, so we stop training them, and then something happens to those automatic surgeons? That's not a broken dishwasher. We can't just figure out how to do a surgery ourselves if our surgeon bought blue screens. That is a skilled job that requires decades of education and hands-on training, and if we become completely dependent on a machine to do it to the point that we forget how to do it ourselves because we simply no longer need to know, that's terrifying. We're fucked. Doesn't that scare people? It scares me. And I don't mean to go all doomsday, fear-mongering, catastrophization on you here. I'm not saying society's on the verge of collapse or that every skilled job that's automated by technology will have similarly extreme consequences. And I know we already have automated a lot of skilled human jobs and the world hasn't ended just because we as a species no longer know how to do them. I also know the machines responsible for doing these jobs that we no longer can be repaired in most instances. So even if we can't do them ourselves, it's not like we've permanently lost the things that we created to do them for us. But broadly speaking, the dependence on automation that's replacing human skills scares me, and I don't think that's unreasonable. I'm not necessarily saying that means we shouldn't do it at all, but I do think there needs to be a limit to it, and some very fucking careful thought given to the potential consequences in each individual instance of it. And I don't see a lot of that thought being given right now. I don't want us to wake up 100 years from now and realize we're living the plot of Wall-E or Idiocracy, which sounds dramatic, but like, a friend recommended Idiocracy to me a few weeks ago, and I hadn't seen it in forever, so I rewatched it. And there were so many moments during that rewatch where I found myself thinking, oh, that's not some scary but ridiculous and impossible dystopian thing that would never happen. That is literally something that is currently happening. Anyway, I said there were two things that make me uncertain about my stance on labor automation, so I'm gonna move on to the second one before I ramble about the first one for a full year. Those comments saying we should automate jobs people shouldn't have to waste their lives doing so that they can do the things they do want to do got to me so much, partially because I don't fundamentally disagree with them, at least in theory, and partially because I've been rewatching Agretzko recently, and they reminded me so much of what one of the characters in it very vocally believes. If you haven't seen it, spoilers, I guess, but Retzko, an average office worker with some very warranted anger towards society hidden behind her customer service smile, starts dating a guy who turns out to be a billionaire tech mogul who built his fame and fortune on the creation of an AI called Ennio. And this guy, Tadano, basically wants Ennio to do exactly what those comments talk about. Automate all of the jobs that people shouldn't have to be stuck wasting their time with so that they can be free to devote their lives to their passions instead. When he takes Retzko across the country on his personal plane just to get ramen at his favorite restaurant in Hokkaido like a typical billionaire with no concern for the environment at all whatsoever when it conflicts with his desire for dinner, I guess, they start talking about his dreams and goals for Ennio. He tells her, I want to free people from drudge work. No one should be stuck working a job that a robot or an AI can do. People's skills are meant for something greater. When it's all said and done, that's how we make the world a better place. We're gonna make that a reality someday. Ennio's gonna put a lot of jobs out to pasture. Retzko then presents a very valid argument, but without them, how are people gonna have enough money to live? You can't give us all an allowance. To which Tadano replies, yeah, don't I know it. Late-stage capitalism is such a pain. That's why it's gotta go. Ennio's gonna help us all aim higher. Tangible results in 30 years. The first time I watched this scene when the show came out in 2018, I thought that was incredible. I thought Tadano was genuinely the kind of hero society needed, and not just the society in the show. And I still think that in theory, his plan would make the world a better place. I think that if all of our needs were met and society was self-sustaining by way of something like NEO, my fears of dependence aside, us then having a basic living allowance and the freedom to do the work that we want would be amazing. We would be free to pursue our dreams, to innovate boundlessly, to invent and experiment, to explore our creativity, to find what actually fulfills us as people and devote our lives to it. It sounds like a utopia. It also sounds like an idealist's pipe dream, because in my opinion, that's exactly what it is. When I rewatched it this spring, I listened to that same speech that once got a young, starry-eyed, 20-year-old dreamer version of me holding back hopeful tears, and I laughed. I don't feel good about that. I don't want to be jaded enough that hearing the goals of an idealist is a source of bitter amusement to me. But all I could think was, are you fucking kidding me? Do you not see the plethora of glaring issues that would prevent any of that from working in reality? Of course that utopia would be amazing. Of course I want people to be able to live in the beautiful, free world that Tadano dreams of making a reality. I want to live there. But eliminating all quote-unquote drudge work jobs by replacing the humans doing them with AI isn't gonna free them to do things they'd prefer instead. All it's gonna do is take away their only source of income, exactly like Retsuko said, because there isn't any basic living allowance available to people whose jobs would be made redundant. The whole eliminating every job a robot or AI can do ideal works only if there's a system in place in which the people who used to be doing those jobs no longer need the income that those jobs were giving them. Tadano is a well-intentioned character who seems to genuinely want the best for society, but he's also incredibly privileged, naive, and short-sighted. It doesn't seem to occur to him that he'd have to upend the entire economy by providing a universal living allowance for people to be able to benefit from NEO stealing their jobs, or that without that allowance, it would just leave them destitute and not at all free to pursue their dreams. He comes from a place of so much privilege that poverty and its consequences don't seem to register to him, at least not realistically. There's a lot of evidence of that in the show that I didn't notice the first time I watched it, largely because I was also a naive idealist back then, and I was too blinded by the beauty of Tadano's ideas to see much else. The most prominent example besides the irresponsible overuse of his private plane is when he's introduced to internet cafes. He finds it quaint and novel that people in those internet cafes are limited to the very small space of a cubicle, because he finds his own lavishly gigantic living space to be unnecessary, since he only uses a similarly tiny amount of it. So the idea of deliberately limiting himself to a cubicle instead appeals to him. And instead of just going to an internet cafe like everyone else, he fucking buys one, only to use a single cubicle himself while the rest of them sit empty, single-handedly displacing the entire community of homeless people that were living in those cubicles, because that consequence seemingly didn't even occur to him. I don't think he would have done it if it did occur to him, because I honestly don't think he's a selfish asshole so much as I think that he's an incredibly naive, sheltered, privileged man-child with no concept of what it's like to live outside of his little 1%er bubble. I don't think he ever would have displaced that homeless community if it occurred to him that his impulse buy of their temporary home would have that consequence. I just think he's pathologically incapable of anticipating any consequences that he doesn't experience himself firsthand, and I think that applies heavily to his views on labor automation via AI too, and by extension, the views of the people in the comments arguing for similar ideals. But the impact on the economy and the job market isn't the only problem with all of this. I have more things to ramble incoherently about. I'm not done. First off, even if we all did have a basic living allowance and no need to do a job just to get by, do we really think that the majority of people would choose to keep working anyway? Tadano is an incredibly driven, passionate person who had a dream that mattered so much to him that he devoted his entire life to it, and he would have spent all of his time and energy working on it whether he had to make money from it or not. Because of that, he assumes that everyone has a passion like that everyone has a dream that they would be pursuing if their job wasn't holding them back from it, and that given the opportunity to no longer work, they would do that instead. But that's not really realistic. I would argue that Tadano represents the minority of people, not the majority. Sure, some people would absolutely follow in his footsteps and devote their now idle time to the pursuit of self-betterment and professional and creative fulfillment, and they would work without the need for money to motivate them because that fulfillment was all the motivation they'd need. I absolutely would myself, and I know a lot of others would too. But a lot, and I mean a lot, of others still would be a lot more likely to stagnate instead, because they don't have any dreams or passions that they want to work towards, and without the need to work to get by, it's naive to assume that they would all do so on their own anyway. I imagine there would be no small number of people that would instead decide to embrace hedonism completely and spend the entirety of their time on leisure and never work another day in their lives. Is that a bad thing? I don't know, actually. That's a bigger question, and one that requires a lot of philosophical contemplation of wider-reaching concepts to really address. But it's definitely not the ideal world that people envision when they imagine what would happen if none of us had to work anymore. A lot of the greatest innovations have been the result of pressure. People were put under pressure to invent newer, better things, because they needed the money that would come from doing so, because there was pressure pushing them forwards. Financial compensation allows us the opportunity to better ourselves and our lives, so seeking it incentivizes us very strongly to work harder at whatever it is is that we do, and working harder is what's driven humanity to achieve what it has. If we don't have that pressure or drive anymore, a lot of us simply won't have the desire to keep pushing ourselves forwards, to keep innovating, and I think a lot of potential progress would be lost to that. I also want to quickly mention the importance of having a purpose before moving on though, because I think it's equally important. Whether we love our jobs or not, to at least some degree, they give us a feeling of purpose in our lives. Doing those jobs subsequently gives us a sense of fulfillment, even if we don't necessarily enjoy them, because we feel like we're contributing something important to society and to our own lives. We feel like there's a reason that we're here, that we're needed, that we're part of something. The Tadanos among us can derive that from within, because having a dream that you're that devoted to gives you a sense of purpose whether you have a job to do as well or not. But for the not Tadanos, which as I've said probably represent a much larger part of the population in every sense, not just this one, losing our day jobs would threaten to remove our purpose without anything left to replace it. And the consequences of that are more significant than people realize. A lot of studies have been done into mortality after retirement, specifically the hypothesis that the loss of a job to give a person's life purpose and direction leads to an earlier death, potentially resulting from the loss of motivation to keep going on. Now, to my knowledge, none of these studies are conclusive, largely because of the influence of bias and the fact that there are so many contributing factors to post-retirement mortality rates that it's impossible to objectively judge how much of an impact purposelessness has in comparison with the rest. So I can't say one way or another whether or not working really does make people die sooner, but there's a reason there's been so much investigation into the idea. Whether it leads to physical deterioration or not, the feeling of purposelessness that comes from no longer having a job does leave a lot of people feeling empty, depressed, and irrelevant, sometimes even forgotten. I can't imagine automating the majority of jobs with AI and taking those purposes away would have a particularly positive impact on mental or physical health. But I want to talk about one more thing Tadano overlooked with his ideals that I think applies to this whole situation too. That not only do some people not have passions or dreams that they want to pursue instead of working, some people genuinely enjoy their quote-unquote drudge work. Some people feel happy and fulfilled doing jobs that robots or AI can do, and they want to be able to keep doing them. What's particularly funny about this, in reference to the Agretsuko example, is that that's the exact issue Tadano and Retsuko face a few episodes later. As their relationship develops further, Tadano sees how much better Retsuko feels, or at least how much better he thinks she feels, after a break from work, and flippantly tells her to just quit her job. Oh, you should quit. It's not like your job is something you inherently love to do. Just walk away. Retsuko tentatively agrees, saying, "You're right, but I have responsibilities," to which he replies, "Thinking like that is what keeps people stuck in jobs that steal their life. It's free market Stockholm syndrome that touts shared captivity as the greater good. Cherryman trading's fine without you." Openly uncomfortable and arguably even upset, Retsuko quietly says, "I know," before Tadano continues on what looks and sounds a lot like a villain monologue, especially since he's putting on his asshole CEO suit and leaning down towards her intimidatingly as he delivers it. Not to mention the fact that programs like Enio will be doing most of your work in the near future. Why wait for that shoe to drop? I'm loaded, Retsi. You can do whatever you want to. Start your own business or dive into something creative. We're not even gonna get into the fact that the context of this is that he also refuses to marry her and give her financial security, but instead just wants her to quit her job based on nothing but him giving her his word that he'll support her. Because I'll start rambling all over again about how this infuriatingly well-intentioned but ignorant Nepo baby is blinded by his own naivety and completely incapable of seeing anything from anyone's perspective but his own. Which isn't the point, because this isn't an Agretsuko character analysis channel, as much as I wish it was. The point is, he's completely confident that she'd be better off quitting her job because there must be something else she'd enjoy more. And he's wrong. Later on in the episode, at least I think it was the same episode, it might have been the next one, after Retsuko's thought about his suggestion for a while, she sits him down and tells him, "I'm not gonna quit my job. There's nothing I would rather do." Tadano, in all of his boundless arrogance and borderline narcissism, replies, "You're kidding, right? I mean, there's gotta be something. Think about it." And Retsuko simply says, "I did. She's happy with her life the way it is." That was actually the inspiration for the art in this video's speed paint. It's Tadano's plane flying through the sky without her in the background, but she's at peace with herself and without him, because her life, while not as grand and ideal as his, is exactly what she wants it to be. Her job might not be her dream, but there's nothing else that she'd rather be doing. And a lot of people feel that way. A lot of people are fulfilled doing work that doesn't mean something to them personally because their job doesn't define them. They enjoy doing it, and even if it's the things they do outside of work that give their lives purpose, they still don't want to stop doing the job that sustains them and keeps them busy. I don't know. 7 pages into the script and I still don't even really know what point I'm trying to make, but I guess that's because I'm not really trying to make a point. I don't know what my own opinion is on this, because there's just so much nuance to consider that I don't think I'm even capable of having just one opinion. I guess I just wanted to share a little more about my thoughts on AI replacing jobs in general, not just artist jobs, because they're not as simple as all labor automation bad. I see the benefits. I understand that there's the potential for good in AI automating some jobs, and I get the appeal of the utopia that it promises in theory. I'm completely against AI replacing artist jobs, even if the technology was created ethically, because I don't think the creation of art is something that automation can or should replace. But that doesn't mean I'm against AI replacing all jobs, at least in theory. Take a shot every time I say in theory, Jesus. A lot of this comes down to the comparison between theoretical concepts and realistic applications, okay? In theory is relevant to say. Anyway, as much as I see the appeal and understand the value of that, I also think there are so many negatives to be considered alongside the positives that shouldn't be ignored. I'm torn. I see both sides. And I think seeing both sides when it comes to this topic in particular is important, which is why I wanted to make this video and clarify that I do. Because I realize that the way I've spoken about generative AI and the art industry in particular doesn't exactly suggest that I do. I don't know how I feel about labor automation. I'm not against it just because I'm against generative AI being utilized for it, but I'm also incredibly concerned about how far it's going. I don't want to see any job eliminated by AI without regulations and a system in place to ensure that the people formerly doing those jobs aren't left destitute. I don't want to see humanity becoming so dependent on AI that we can't survive without it. And I think considering those concerns is a lot more important than it's seemingly being treated in the midst of all the AI hype and constant obsession with AI and automation-based progress. I don't know, but I do know that these are conversations that we need to be having, and I want to be open to having them and participating in them and seeing more nuance than just AI bad or AI good. And I realize now that I haven't necessarily done the best job at encouraging that dialogue through my presentation of my views, and I wanted to fix that, or at least talk about it. I don't know. Actually, you know what? Forget the in theory shots. Take a shot every time I say, I don't know. That's so much worse. There's just a lot I don't know when it comes to this, including how to feel about it. So in all sincerity, please let me know what you think in the comments. I want my views challenged, I want to expand my perspective, and I want these to be conversations that we can have. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed today's video. Special thank you as always to channel members Joseph Solomon, TC Pratt, Haruki Saluzzo, Peachy, King Good James, Art of Amethyst Fable, Extinction Animation, Andy the Hedgehog, Kai the Memer, Jazz, Abyss Reborn, Just Sayori, Stardust, and Angry Shroomish, as well as patrons Batman, Kyle Lowe, Blue Swanson, Jamisha Walker, Langshi, Kim Yen, Crazy Asar, Gentong, Grayson Xavier, Blah Mage, TC Pratt, Finn, Celine Merriman, Eldritchia, The Stray Dog, Allura, Greg Noble, Dekugan, Jenny Chan, Catbus, Mac, Lucy Yamajiki, Selena BB, Pride, Totally Shogun, Insomniac Sleep Schedule, Wingtang Wong, Marie Greer, Potato, Jazz, Voidwalker, Latte Tabby, Christian Cook, Adam Suroviets, Doriaki, Varius, and Hailstorm, and I'll see you in the next one.